They say that every great city is built on a secret, a foundational lie so vast, so profound, that its shadow is mistaken for history. What you are about to hear is one of those secrets. A truth buried under a century of steel, smoke, and deliberate forgetting. This isn't a story you were meant to find. It is a key, and once you use it, the world you thought you knew will never look the same. We begin in the dead of winter, 1887. The air in Pittsburgh is so cold it feels like glass. Inside, a Fifth Avenue mansion, a palace of industrial might, a man descends a marble staircase. This man is not just a millionaire. He is a king in an age of kings, a titan of steel named Cornelius Vandermark. But on this morning, he is not a king. He is a man confronting a void. In the center of his grand foyer, laid out on a Persian rug, with the precision of a funeral rite, is his wife's emerald evening gown. The silk is still warm, holding the ghost of her body, but Evangeline Vandermark is gone. The front door is bolted from the inside. Every window is sealed against the Pennsylvania. Winter. No servant saw her leave. No one heard a sound. She vanished from a locked room, from a locked house, leaving behind nothing but a question woven in silk. The official record will tell you the case went cold, but that is the first lie. The truth is, the case was never allowed to begin. Because what happened to Evangeline wasn't a disappearance. It was an erasure, a lesson in power, written in silence and fear. And you are about to learn how it was done. Power does not announce itself with trumpets. It moves in the quiet moments after a crisis is discovered. Look at Cornelius Vandermark, standing over the emerald gown. A lesser man would show panic. He would shout for the police, for his servants to search the grounds. But Cornelius is not a lesser man. He built an empire not with his hands, but with his will. And his will is a cold, silent instrument of control. He shows no grief. He shows no confusion. The servants, gathered in the shadows of the foyer, see something far more terrifying. They see calculation. His eyes, the color of cold steel, are not searching for his wife. They are scanning for weaknesses in the story that is forming in this room. He is assessing the scene not as a husband, but as an architect of reality. The warm gown, the locked door, the scent of her perfume hanging in the air, these are not clues to a mystery. To him, they are variables in an equation he must now solve. His first command is not to find his wife. It is to control the narrative. He orders the head housekeeper, Margaret Sullivan, to say nothing to anyone. He sends his butler, Charles Henley, not to the police precinct, but to fetch his private secretary, the man who handles his secrets, not his business. This is the first lesson in the grammar of power. Control the information, and you control the past, the present, and the future. He is not trying to find Evangeline. He is making sure no one else can either, because her absence is not a question he wants answered. It is the answer itself. An answer he orchestrated to understand the silence that fell over the Vandermark mansion. You must understand the city that it commanded. Pittsburgh in 1887 was not a city. It was a furnace, a crucible where men were melted down and reformed into something else, either into cogs for the great industrial machine or into the gods who owned that machine. The sky was a permanent shroud of gray smoke, a testament to the ceaseless fires that forged the nation's steel. This was a city of violent contrasts. Palaces of obscene wealth, like the Vandermark mansion, cast their long shadows over squalid tenements where families lived and died in the soot. Ambition was the air they breathed, thick with the smell of coal and desperation. Here, a man could claw his way from the gutter to a throne, but the rungs of that ladder were often greased with the blood of his rivals. Cornelius Vandermark was the city's reigning deity. He had not inherited his wealth. He had forged it through a combination of visionary genius and a ruthlessness that made other robber barons tremble. He had revolutionized steel production, but his true innovation was in the art of elimination. A boiler explosion at a competitor's mill, a key engineer vanishing on his way home from work, a fire consuming a rival's factory just days before a major contract was signed. These were not unfortunate accidents. They were brushstrokes in the masterpiece of his empire. And his marriage to Evangeline Hartwell was his most strategic acquisition of all, a move to coat his brutal power in the luster of old-world legitimacy. He had not married a woman. He had acquired a symbol. And symbols, when they cease to be useful, must be discarded. Who was Evangeline Vandermark? To Pittsburgh society, she was a portrait of perfect aristocracy, the daughter of a Boston banking dynasty, 20 years younger than her Titan husband. She was the grace to his grit, the velvet glove on his iron fist. She had auburn hair that seemed to trap the gaslight, and a mind that had been polished to a brilliant shine at the finest women's schools. She spoke 3 languages, played Chopin with a concert pianist's touch, and could navigate the treacherous currents of high society with an effortless smile. But this portrait was a lie. It was a mask she wore. Beneath the polished surface of the socialite was a core of unyielding moral iron. She had been raised to believe in justice, in a world governed by principles, not just by profit margins. She had married Cornelius, believing he was a great innovator who would lift humanity. She came to realize he was a predator who saw human life as raw material. This was her fatal miscalculation. She thought she had married a man. She had, in fact, married an engine of pure, unfeeling ambition. By the winter of 1887, the mask was slipping. The vibrant hostess had become a recluse, haunting the mansion's massive library. The staff whispered of her long, solitary walks through the cities. Grimy, working-class districts, returning with mud on her boots and a storm in her green eyes. She was no longer just the wife of the king. She had become a spy in his court. She was gathering intelligence, documenting the human cost of her husband's empire. She was building a case. And in a kingdom built on secrets, there is no greater crime than the pursuit of truth. Every kingdom requires a court, and the Vandermark mansion was no exception. Its staff of 12 was a perfectly calibrated machine of loyalty and discretion. These were not mere servants. They were silent witnesses, the keepers of the house's rhythm and its secrets. Margaret Sullivan, the head housekeeper, was a woman of fierce Irish intelligence who had escaped famine and poverty. She ran the mansion with an iron will and saw everything. She noticed Evangeline's growing withdrawal, the locked journal, the way she would flinch at her husband's touch. Thomas Brennan, the Scottish groundskeeper, was a man of the earth. He knew every inch of the estate's 4 acres. He was the first to notice the strange, late-night visitors who came and went through the service entrance, leaving no record of their purpose. He saw the faint light burning in the old ice house at hours when the entire estate should have been dark and silent. Charles Henley, the butler, was a man who had made a profession of being invisible. He was present for every private dinner, every hushed argument. He saw the cold distance grow between Cornelius and Evangeline, a silence that became heavier and more menacing with each passing month. And then there was Dr. Franklin Westbrook, the family physician, a man of science and reputation, who began to document in his private notes the marital difficulties that were taking a physical and psychological toll on his patient. Evangeline, these were the eyes and ears of the mansion. They were loyal, they were discreet, but they were human, and they saw the storm gathering. Their testimony, had it ever been properly heard, would have unraveled the entire conspiracy. This is why the first act of a cover-up is not to destroy evidence, but to silence the witnesses, to make them doubt what they saw, what they knew, until the truth itself feels like a phantom. Let us return to the night of the disappearance. December 12th, 1887. The evening unfolds with the suffocating precision of a ritual. Dinner is served at exactly 7 o'clock. The meal is a grotesque display of wealth. Roasted pheasant, vegetables. From the estate's own greenhouse, a French wine that cost more than a steelworker earned in a month. Cornelius is in high spirits, speaking of new conquests, of expanding his dominion. But the butler, Henley, notices a crack in the facade. Cornelius keeps checking his pocket watch, a nervous tick from a man who is never nervous. He is not enjoying the moment. He is waiting for a predetermined event on a timeline only he can see. Evangeline is the opposite. She is a ghost at her own table. She barely eats, her eyes flitting towards the snow-covered windows as if expecting a savior or an horn. Executioner. Margaret Sullivan, the housekeeper, would later recall the look on her face. It was the look of a woman trying to memorize the world she was about to leave. She was not just quiet, she was resigned. A profound, terrible calm had settled over her, the kind of peace that comes when the final move in a deadly game has been made, and all that is left is to wait for the board to be cleared. The air in the dining room is thick with unspoken knowledge. Two people, bound by law and society, sit across from each other as complete strangers and mortal enemies. One is celebrating a victory he has not yet announced. The other is mourning a loss she cannot speak of. This is not a marriage. It is a cold war, and its final silent battle is about to begin. At 9:30 p.m., the ritual continues. Margaret Sullivan helps Evangeline prepare for bed, but she is not helped into a simple nightgown. She is dressed in the emerald silk evening gown, the one she would be found in hours later. Think about the significance of this. This was not a random choice. This was a costume for a performance. The gown itself was a masterpiece from Paris, its intricate beadwork shimmering under the gas lamps. It was a dress for a public spectacle, not for a private night's rest. Why wear it? It was a message, a final, defiant act of identity. She was not going to vanish as a frightened woman in a plain nightdress. She was going to be remembered as the magnificent lady of the house, in the very symbol of the wealth that had become her prison. It was in this moment that she performed an act that would haunt Margaret for the rest of her days. Evangeline embraced the housekeeper, holding her tightly. "Thank you for your kindness, Margaret," she whispered. "You have been like a mother." To me, it was not a thank you. It was a farewell, a transfer of emotional legacy. Then Margaret noticed another detail that seemed out of place. A small silver locket around Evangeline's neck, one she had never seen before. It was not expensive, not like her other jewels, but she clutched it protectively. When asked, she said only that it contained something precious that must be preserved. This locket, this small overlooked object, was more important than all the diamonds and emeralds in the house. It was a vessel, a time capsule containing the one thing Cornelius could not control, the truth, the final confirmed sighting. 11 o'clock. Thomas Brennan, the groundskeeper, is making his final patrol of the estate's perimeter. The snow is falling softly, muffling the sounds of the city, wrapping the mansion in a cocoon of white silence. He looks up at the second-floor windows. A single light burns in Evangeline's private study. He can see her silhouette. She is seated at her desk, writing. Her posture is not one of leisure. Her pen is flying across the page, a frantic, desperate urgency in her movements. She is not writing letters. She is bearing witness. She is in a race against the clock that only she and her husband can hear ticking. Inside that room, her study, is the arsenal she has assembled. This is her sanctuary, the one place in the mansion that is truly hers. The walls are lined with books, but behind those books are hidden photographs, stolen documents, correspondence that maps out the vast criminal enterprise of the Pittsburgh Circle. There are maps of Pennsylvania, dotted with red pins marking the locations of accidents. There are notes detailing the victims, the financial gains, the timeline of her husband's bloody ascent. She knows they are coming for her. She knows her plan to expose them has been compromised. This is her last stand. She is not writing a journal entry. She is writing an indictment. She is forging her final weapon, a narrative so powerful, so damning, that she believes it might survive her. She is pouring every last ounce of her courage, her intelligence, her grief onto those pages, hoping that paper and ink can achieve the justice that she no longer can. She is creating a ghost that will haunt her murderers forever. The dawn breaks, cold and gray. At 6 a.m, the house begins to stir, following the rigid clockwork of domestic service. Margaret Sullivan begins her duties. She finds the heavy iron bolt on the front door locked. From the inside, she checks the windows. All 12 on the ground floor are latched shut, their seals unbroken. The upper floors are inaccessible. The snow outside is a pristine, undisturbed blanket. No footprints, no carriage tracks. It is a perfect, sealed tomb. This scene is designed to scream one thing: the impossible, a supernatural event. A woman who has dematerialized. This is the first layer of the deception, the public-facing myth. It is a magic trick, and like all magic tricks, it relies on misdirection. It forces you to ask the wrong question. Not, who did this? But how could this have happened? As long as the police and the public are debating the how, they will never get to the who. But it is in the grand foyer that the trick's centerpiece is revealed, the emerald gown, lying on the rug, arranged with an almost ceremonial care. When Margaret touches it, the fabric is still warm. The air smells of lavender, Evangeline's signature scent. It is an act of breathtaking arrogance, a statement. She was just here, and now she is nowhere. This is psychological warfare. It is meant to create a sense of awe and terror, to elevate the crime from a sordid domestic affair to a grand, inexplicable mystery. And beside the gown, a single page torn from her journal. 4 words in her handwriting. The truth must survive. A final desperate message, left behind like a battle standard on a lost field. It is both a plea and a prophecy. Look closer at the scene. The servants, in their initial shock, notice details that the official investigation will later ignore. Power doesn't just create a story. It erases the details that contradict it. The Persian rug beneath the gown, it's slightly discolored. Cleaned, perhaps. Treated with something. And the air, it's not just lavender. There is another faint chemical odor. Something medicinal. What Thomas Brennan, the groundskeeper, would later describe as the stuff they use in hospitals to put you to sleep, chloroform. The impossible, supernatural vanishing act begins to dissolve, revealing a grittier, more brutal reality. And the jewelry. Her massive, priceless wedding ring lies on the floor beside the gown, an object of immense monetary value, left behind. But the small silver locket that Margaret saw her clutching the night before, it's gone. The thief was not interested in wealth. They were interested in information. They took the one thing that contained proof, leading behind the symbol of her bondage. This is a critical distinction. This was not a robbery. This was an intelligence operation, a targeted extraction of a specific asset. When Cornelius is finally summoned, his reaction is the final damning piece of the puzzle. There is no shock. There is no grief. There is only a pale, quiet fear. Not the fear of a man who has lost his wife, but the fear of a man whose carefully constructed plan has just been executed, and who is now confronting the terrifying reality of what he has done. His mask of control is perfect, but to the servants, who know him, the fear is visible. It is the fear of a God who has just murdered his creation and is now worried about leaving fingerprints on the universe. The official investigation was a masterpiece of institutional corruption, a carefully choreographed play designed to reach a predetermined conclusion. Nothing to see here. The case was assigned to Detective Samuel Crawford, a 20-year veteran of the force. Crawford was a rare thing in 1880s Pittsburgh. An honest man. He was methodical, relentless, and possessed an innate allergy to convenient lies. He had risen through the ranks by solving the cases no one else could, the ones that required digging deeper than anyone was comfortable with. He was the perfect man for the job, which is precisely why he had to be stopped. From the moment he stepped into the Vandermark mansion, he felt the walls of influence closing in. His questions were met with rehearsed answers and veiled threats from Vandermark's lawyers. Key areas, like the old ice house, were declared structurally unsound and off-limits. Evidence, like Evangeline's missing journals, was claimed to have never existed, despite sworn testimony from the staff. Crawford was an old-school cop who believed in facts, in evidence, in the simple, linear progression from crime to culprit. But he was now operating in a world where power did not just obstruct justice, it redefined reality. He was a creature of logic in a kingdom of magic, trying to map a landscape that was being actively redrawn around him by forces he could not see. He was not just investigating a missing person. He was unknowingly declaring war on a shadow government. And in that war, a police detective's badge was no shield at all. It was a target. Crawford's instincts told him the servants knew more. In the cold, official interviews, they were hesitant, their answers clipped. But in the quiet moments, away from the watchful eyes of the house, the truth began to seep out. Margaret Sullivan confided in him. She spoke of the mysterious visitors, the well-dressed men who came to see Evangeline late at night, slipping in through the service entrance. They were not social callers. They carried themselves with the cold efficiency of military men or spies. They met with Evangeline in her study, and after they left, her fear and agitation would be palpable for days. Then came Thomas Brennan, the groundskeeper. He told Crawford about the ice house. It hadn't been used for years, yet he had seen footprints in the snow leading to it on multiple occasions. A woman's small boots, Evangeline's. But sometimes there was another set of tracks, a man's heavy work boots. They didn't come from the mansion. They came from the direction of the public road. This wasn't a social visit. This was a clandestine meeting. A drop, an exchange of information. The ice house was not just a relic of a bygone era. It had been repurposed. It was a dead drop, a communications hub in a secret war. When Crawford tried to get a warrant to search the building, he was blocked by a wall of legal maneuvering. By the time he overcame the objections and returned 3 days later, the entrance to the ice house had been sealed with fresh mortar. It was no longer a structure. It was a tomb, a monument to a secret that had been permanently buried in stone. The official story was crumbling, so Crawford dug deeper, not into the crime scene, but into the victim. He began to investigate Evangeline's family, the Hartwells of Boston. He expected to find a story of old money and prestige. Instead, he found a story of systematic destruction. The once mighty Hartwell banking dynasty had been ruined in less than 5 years, brought down by a series of financial calamities that were too precise, too targeted to be mere bad luck. This was a demolition. Then he found the file on her father. Harrison Hartwell died in 1886. Official cause, suicide. But there was no note. Friends and family insisted he was not depressed. He was, in fact, on the verge of exposing a massive fraud scheme involving the manipulation of steel industry investments. A scheme that originated in Pittsburgh. The puzzle pieces began to slam into place with sickening force. Then there was her brother, Edmund Hartwell, a brilliant young lawyer who had been working with his father on the investigation. After his father's death, Edmund had supposedly gone to California to seek his fortune, but Crawford could find no record of him ever arriving. He had simply vanished. This was the pattern, the template of the Pittsburgh Circle. First, you identify a threat. Then, you destroy their finances, their reputation, their family. And if that doesn't silence them, you erase them from the world and call it suicide or a tragic disappearance. Evangeline's marriage was not a fairy tale. It was the final move in the checkmate against her family. Cornelius hadn't just married her. He had conquered her, absorbing the last remnant of a rival power he had already annihilated. Crawford was no longer a detective investigating a single crime. He was an archaeologist unearthing a civilization of predators. He began to see the connections, a web of power that stretched across the state. He started a private file, a place for the truths too dangerous for official reports. He called the organization the Pittsburgh Circle. He estimated they were responsible for at least 36 accidents, suicides, and disappearances over the past decade. It was a secret society of industrialists, a cartel bound not just by greed, but by shared criminality. They were the apex predators of the Gilded Age. They didn't just compete in the market, they culled the herd. Their methods were sophisticated and brutal. They used private detectives, former soldiers, and hired killers as their instruments. They owned politicians, judges, and newspaper editors, allowing them to control not just the economic landscape, but the very narrative of their time. They could commit murder in broad daylight and have it reported as a tragic act of God. Crawford realized that Evangeline had discovered this. She hadn't just stumbled upon a secret. She had uncovered the operating system of her era. She was not a victim of a random crime. She was a casualty of war, a soldier killed behind enemy lines. Her house was not a home. It was the enemy's headquarters. And her husband was not just a member of this circle. He was its dark heart, its founding father. The scope of it was staggering. It was a shadow government, a cancer that had metastasized within the bones of the American dream. And Crawford, with his notepad and his nagging questions, was poking it with a stick. 3 months after Evangeline vanished, the war she had been fighting erupted into the open. A massive explosion ripped through the Consolidated Steelworks, a mill owned by Cornelius Vandermark's chief rival. 17 men were killed. The official cause was a faulty boiler. But the whispers in the steel mills, the places where truth survives long after the newspapers have printed the lies, told a different story. They spoke of sabotage. The explosion was too precise, targeting key infrastructure as if guided by an expert hand. But the most damning piece of evidence was found in the wreckage by a night watchman. A partially burned leather satchel. Inside were engineering drawings, schedules for accidents, and plans detailing the structural weaknesses of multiple Pittsburgh steel mills. And the handwriting on several of the documents was elegant, feminine, and instantly recognizable to anyone who had seen Evangeline's correspondence. This was her work. This was the evidence she had been gathering, but the papers revealed a horrifying twist. They contained notes about the Consolidated Steelworks, information that seemed to detail how to carry out the very sabotage that had just occurred. At first glance, it looked like she was a perpetrator, a willing accomplice in her husband's campaign of terror. This was the Circle's genius. They didn't just eliminate their enemies. They implicated them. They used Evangeline's own intelligence against her, twisting her investigation into a weapon that could be used to destroy her reputation even after her death. They were making her a monster, ensuring that even if the truth came out, it would be so contaminated with lies that no one would be able to distinguish the hero from the villain. Detective Crawford, now operating completely off the books, was given the satchel. He knew this was the key. He analyzed the documents for weeks, his obsession growing. The papers were a Rosetta Stone for the Pittsburgh Circle's crimes. But among them, he found the truth of Evangeline's role. He found copies of letters between E.V., Evangeline Vandermark, and E.H., Edmund Hartwell. Her brother was alive. He was in hiding, and they had been working together. They were planning to expose the entire conspiracy. Evangeline had been playing the most dangerous game imaginable. She was a double agent in her own home. She had been feeding the Circle intelligence about competitors, information they demanded from her under the threat of her brother's death. They were using Edmund's life as leverage, forcing her to be an accomplice. But with every piece of information she gave them, she was making copies. She was documenting every demand, every threat, every crime. She was building the case that would destroy them piece by painstaking piece. She was not a monster. She was a strategist of profound courage. She walked through the valley of the shadow of death every single day, dining with her captors, sleeping beside her father's murderer, all while secretly forging the weapons for a war she knew she might not survive. She had turned her prison into an intelligence-gathering post. Her subjugation was her camouflage. Her weakness, as they saw it, was her greatest strength. She was using their own arrogance against them, letting them believe they had broken her, while she was silently mapping their downfall. Before we descend further into this abyss, we must pause. The knowledge you are receiving is not passive. It changes you. It attunes your senses to the hidden frequencies of power that govern the world. To continue, you must make a conscious choice. You must declare your intention to see the world not as it appears, but as it is. This is a covenant, a commitment to carry the weight of this truth. In the comments below, I want you to write a phrase. This is not for me. It is for you. It is a digital ritual to lock in this transformation, to tell the unseen forces and the digital ghosts of the machine that you are no longer asleep. It will also signal to others like you that they are not alone. Write this phrase and then write it again. I am the truth seeker. I am the watcher. Do it now. It is the price of admission for the next level of understanding. You are crossing a threshold. On the other side, the shadows are deeper, but the truth is brighter. You are leaving behind the world of comforting lies and entering the domain of the sovereign man, the one who is not afraid to look into the darkness, because he knows that is where true power is found. Once you have made this declaration, we can continue. We can uncover the final, brutal acts of this drama and understand the legacy of a woman who wagered her life on the belief that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, must survive. Do it now. I am the truth seeker. I am the watcher. With the letters from the satchel, Crawford now had a new destination. He traced the shell companies, the anonymous land purchases made by Vandermark's empire. He found a remote farmhouse in Westmoreland County, 30 miles from the city's prying eyes. It was Evangeline's secret headquarters, her war room. When he arrived, the place felt like a sanctuary and a fortress. It was simple, unassuming, but built for defense. Reinforced. Doors, heavy shutters. Inside, the walls of the study were a spiderweb of corruption. Maps, newspaper clippings, family trees of the industrial elite, all connected by lines of red string. It was the entire conspiracy, laid bare. It was her life's work, her masterpiece of righteous fury. Photographs of secret circle meetings, taken with a hidden camera. Financial ledgers detailing the profits from staged accidents. And a large chart mapping how Cornelius's empire had risen on the ashes of his rivals. This was the proof. Overwhelming, undeniable. But in the cellar, Behind a false wall, he found the heart of the operation. Here was the deepest level of the conspiracy. Evidence that the Circle's activities went beyond industrial sabotage. They were involved in political assassinations, judicial corruption, the elimination of journalists and labor leaders. Their ambition was not just to control an industry, but to control the nation itself. And among the photos in this hidden chamber was the one that stopped Crawford's heart. A picture of the Consolidated Steel Works boiler room, taken weeks before the explosion. Marked on it, in Evangeline's own hand, were the optimal placements for explosive charges. The date was November 15th, 1887. She knew. She knew it was coming. The photograph was a paradox. It seemed to confirm her guilt, yet it was hidden among the evidence of her innocence. Crawford, a man trained to see in black and white, was now navigating a world of gray. He kept digging through the documents in the hidden chamber, and the full tragic picture emerged. Evangeline hadn't been planning the attack. She had been trying to document it. The Circle, knowing she was a potential threat, but not realizing the extent of her own investigation, had used her as a tool. They forced her to analyze the weak points of her husband's competitors, using her brother's life as collateral. It was a test of her loyalty, and a way to implicate her in their crimes. She had complied, but she had also documented every coerced analysis, every piece of intelligence she provided. She photographed and archived it, along with the threats that accompanied the demands. She was building a case not just against them, but for her own defense, a record of her unwilling complicity. But then came the final letter from her brother Edmund, dated December 10th, just 2 days before she vanished. His words were a death knell. He wrote that he had discovered their father's death was not a suicide. It was a murder, ordered by the Circle. And worse, Cornelius knew. He knew that they knew. The game was over. The letter was a frantic warning. They planned to eliminate both of us within days. Disappear. Trust no one. Attached to the letter was a map of the Vandermark estate. On it, the old ice house was circled in red. The final proof is here, a note read. The truth waits in the cold. Crawford finally understood. Evangeline's obsessive visits to the ice house were not meetings. She was building an archive, a final fail-safe cache of the most damning evidence, hidden in the one place her husband thought was a worthless relic. She had been playing for time, trying to get all the pieces in place before she and Edmund made their move to expose the conspiracy. But they had run out of time. Crawford now knew where the ultimate proof was hidden. He was holding the map. He had the key to unlock the entire conspiracy. But as he prepared to leave the farmhouse, he felt a change in the atmosphere. A subtle shift, the feeling of being watched. As he drove back to Pittsburgh, he saw the same dark carriage in his rearview mirror for miles. When he stopped, it stopped. When he turned, it turned. They knew. The Circle's network of informants was everywhere. They had let him find the farmhouse. They had let him piece together the story. They were not trying to stop him from discovering the truth. They were waiting for him to lead them to the final pieces of evidence they hadn't found. They were using him, just as they had used Evangeline. He was no longer the hunter. He was the hound, being allowed to follow a scent that would lead him directly into a trap. His investigation had become his own death warrant. The knowledge he had acquired had made him the single greatest threat to the most powerful men in America. And they were now closing the net. The end for Detective Samuel Crawford came swiftly, and with a brutal, bureaucratic efficiency. On a rainy April morning in 1888, his body was found in an alley behind the very police station where he had worked for 2 decades. The official report, signed with suspicious speed by the chief of police and the city coroner, was concise. Heart attack brought on by excessive drinking. It was a clean, simple narrative. A good cop who had succumbed to a personal demon. A sad but unremarkable end. His wife, however, told a different story. A story that was never recorded in any official document. She said her husband was in perfect health. She said he rarely drank. She said he had been living in a state of high. Alert for weeks, convinced he was being followed. But her voice was drowned out by the official narrative. The most critical fact was buried in the administrative shuffle. On the same night, Crawford died. His office at the station was cleaned out. Every note, every file, every scrap of paper related to the Vandermark case vanished. His private file on the Pittsburgh Circle, his transcription of the letters, the map to the ice house, all of it gone. It was a perfect erasure. They didn't just kill the man. They killed his work. They assassinated his character and then incinerated his legacy. Crawford's death was a message sent to every cop, every journalist, every official in Pittsburgh. It said, "There are doors you do not open. There are secrets you do not uncover. Some truths are not meant to be found, and those who search for them will be buried alongside them." The official investigation was over. The silence was now absolute. In the years that followed, a pall of fear settled over Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh Circle, having weathered the storm, consolidated its power. Cornelius Vandermark, the grieving widower, became an even more respected figure, a titan of industry, a philanthropist, a pillar of the community. He never remarried. He maintained the public performance of a man whose heart was broken, a performance of such magnificent hypocrisy that it bordered on art. The mansion on Fifth Avenue became his fortress. He installed new locks, new security systems. Servants whispered that he had become a prisoner in his own palace, haunted by the ghost he had created. He lived out his days in opulent paranoia, a king ruling over an empire of bone and smoke. The Circle's operations became more subtle, more sophisticated. They moved from brute force to the more elegant violence of financial manipulation and political control. They no longer needed to blow up factories. They could simply bankrupt them. They no longer needed to murder their enemies. They could simply discredit them, ruin them, and watch them fade into obscurity. This is the evolution of power. It learns, it adapts. It becomes less visible, more pervasive. It embeds itself so deeply into the system that it becomes indistinguishable from the system itself. The story of Evangeline Vandermark faded into a local ghost story, a curious piece of folklore. The city and the nation moved on. History, as it always is, was written by the victors. The truth lay dormant, sealed in stone and silence, waiting. Because the one thing that men like Cornelius never understand is that the truth does not die. It hibernates. Decades passed. The Gilded Age gave way to the Progressive Era, then the Great War. A new century was born. Cornelius Vandermark died. In 1903, a celebrated captain of industry, his dark secrets seemingly buried with him. The mansion on Fifth Avenue was sold, passing through several hands before falling into disuse. It stood as a decaying monument to a forgotten era. Then, in 1921, a new owner decided to renovate the decaying relic. Construction crews moved in, their hammers and crowbars breaking the long silence of the house. It was during this demolition that a worker noticed something strange. The interior dimensions of the Grand Library did not match the building's exterior footprint. There was a void, a space that shouldn't exist. He tapped on the solid oak paneling along the far wall. One section sounded hollow. With a crowbar, he pried it open. The panel swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a dark, narrow opening. A wave of stale, cold air washed over them. Inside was a hidden chamber, a room that did not exist on any blueprint. And in that room, the truth had been waiting for 34 years. On shelves lining the walls were stacks of documents, photographs, and journals miraculously preserved in the dry, still air. It was Evangeline's complete archive. The evidence she had died to protect, the ghost she had created, had finally found its voice. The workers had not just found a hidden room. They had stumbled upon the secret history of a nation. The discovery of the hidden chamber was like opening a pharaoh's tomb. It was a time capsule of a secret war. The archive was a prosecutor's dream. Evangeline's meticulous documentation laid out the entire conspiracy. The financial records showing how the circle profited from insider knowledge of accidents they had engineered. The photographs of their secret meetings, capturing the faces of some of the most powerful men in America as they planned their crimes. The copies of her correspondence with her brother, detailing their desperate plan to expose the truth. But it was her final journal, bound in red leather, that told the most chilling story. In its pages, written in a hand that grew more frantic with each entry, she documented her final days. She described how she had confronted Cornelius, believing, with a desperate naivety, that she could appeal to some remnant of his humanity. His response was brutal. He had laughed at her. He told her that her marriage had been a business transaction, that her family's destruction was a necessary cost, and that she had now become a liability. He gave her an ultimatum: disappear forever or be disappeared. But Evangeline had a final move to play. Her plan was not to flee. It was to fake her disappearance using the mansion's hidden passages, buy herself enough time to get the last of her evidence to her brother, and then vanish for good. The emerald gown in the foyer, the locked doors, it was all part of the stagecraft for her own feigned death. A final, brilliant act of misdirection. Her plan was genius, but it had one fatal flaw. She knew the mansion's secrets, but her husband knew them better. He had built the place. The hidden passages she thought were her escape route were, in fact, his own creation, used for his secret meetings with the circle. As her final journal entry described, just as she was preparing to enter the passages, she heard footsteps. Not the soft tread of servants, but the heavy, confident steps of several men. She recognized their voices. They were members of the circle. Cornelius had not been fooled. He had anticipated her move and had summoned his associates to deal with her permanently. In her final moments of freedom, she made a choice. She abandoned her escape and ran to the library. She triggered the secret mechanism, sealed herself inside the hidden chamber with her archive, and pulled the heavy bookshelves into place behind her. She had saved the evidence, but she had entombed herself. The journal entry breaks off mid-sentence, but the physical evidence in the room told the rest of the story. The marks on the inside of the door showed that the chamber had been sealed from the outside with fresh mortar and bricks. They had walled her in. Cornelius and his men had turned her sanctuary into her sepulchre. In the far corner of the room, beneath a pile of rotted cloth, the workers found what was left of her. The skeletal remains of a woman, still wearing the tattered remnants of a silk gown, and around the neck, the small silver locket she had clutched so desperately on her final night. The locket was the final heartbreaking confirmation. Inside was not a picture of her husband, but a tiny portrait of her father, Harrison Hartwell. On the back, an inscription: "To my beloved daughter, may you always fight for justice." Her entire war, her sacrifice, it was all for him, to avenge his murder and redeem his name. The medical examiner who studied the remains found evidence of a violent struggle, a fracture on the skull from a heavy blow, defensive wounds on the arms. She had not gone quietly. She had fought to the very end. But the most horrifying discovery was what it implied about her final hours. The scratch marks on the walls, the broken fingernails found near the sealed entrance. She had been trapped, buried alive in the dark, surrounded by the truth she had died to protect, she had slowly suffocated or starved to death. The sheer cruelty of it is almost incomprehensible. It was a punishment designed not just to kill, but to inflict the maximum amount of psychological terror. To make her death a slow, agonizing descent into madness, a final lesson in the absolute power of her captors. And yet, even in that darkness, she had performed one last act of defiance. Scratched into the wooden floorboards, likely with a piece of her jewelry, was a final message. It was weak, barely legible, but its intent was clear. Edmund, circle, continues, stop them. Justice for father. EV 1887. With her last breath, she was not praying. She was passing the torch. She was giving her final order to the only soldier she had left. The discovery in 1921 created a firestorm. The story was too big, the evidence too damning to be suppressed, even by the still powerful families connected to the circle. The federal government was forced to intervene. This was no longer a local matter. It was a national conspiracy. Federal agents, led by a determined prosecutor from the Attorney General's office, descended on Pittsburgh. They found Evangeline's brother, Edmund Hartwell, living under an assumed name in California. Now, an old man, he came forward and corroborated the entire story. He filled in the gaps, telling them of the allies who had been mysteriously killed or had disappeared, of the constant threat that had forced him into a lifetime of exile. She knew she was walking into a trap. He told the investigators, his voice breaking with a grief that 34 years had not diminished. But she believed that truth was more powerful than stone walls. She believed it would one day be found. The federal investigation was a revelation. It confirmed the existence of the Pittsburgh Circle and estimated they were responsible for the deaths of nearly 100 people. They uncovered the murder of Detective Crawford, poisoned by Circle operatives. They found his original notes, hidden away by his widow, which corroborated Evangeline's archive. But the investigation uncovered something even more sinister. The conspiracy was not limited to Pittsburgh. It was a nationwide network. Similar circles operated in Cleveland, Chicago, New York, a vast, interconnected web of industrial power that had systematically corrupted the nation's economic and political life for half a century. The fallout was immense. The investigation implicated dozens of America's most prominent families, many of whom were still at the zenith of their power in the 1920s. It led to the largest corruption scandal in American history up to that point. Senators, federal judges, and corporate titans were exposed. Some were prosecuted, but many used their immense wealth and influence to escape true justice, their crimes shielded by statutes of limitation and the death of key witnesses. Cornelius Vandermark's empire was dismantled, its assets funneled into trusts and shell companies that obscured their criminal origins. The families of the Circle rebranded themselves. They became philanthropists, patrons of the arts, their names etched onto university buildings and hospital wings. They laundered their history, washing the blood from their fortunes with the clean water of public charity. This is the ultimate victory of power. It doesn't need to win every battle. It just needs to survive long enough to rewrite the history of the war. The Vandermark mansion, the scene of the crime, was hastily demolished in 1923, citing structural problems. They tore down the evidence, replacing it with a quiet park, erasing the physical reminder of the truth buried beneath it. The circle of silence was complete once more. They had weathered the storm, and while their methods had to change, their power remained intact, passed down through generations, a hidden inheritance of control. But was Evangeline's sacrifice in vain? No. A legacy is not always measured in convictions and headlines. Her courage, amplified by the discovery of her archive, sent shockwaves through the system. It led to the first meaningful federal oversight of corporate crime. It fueled the push for new industrial safety regulations and strengthened the legal protections for labor unions. The evidence she gathered armed a new generation of reformers, giving them the proof they needed to fight for change. The Circle's most brutal methods became too risky. They could no longer operate with the same impunity. Evangeline did not destroy the beast, but she wounded it. She forced it into the shadows, making it adapt. She changed the rules of the game. Her story became a cautionary tale in the halls of power, a reminder that no secret is ever truly safe, that no wall is ever truly permanent. Her act of defiance proved that one person, armed with the truth and an unbreakable will, can challenge an empire. She lost her own battle, but in doing so, she helped turn the tide in the larger war. Her legacy is not written on a gravestone in a Pittsburgh cemetery. It is written in the safety laws that saved the lives of countless workers. It is written in the precedents of corporate accountability that still echo in our legal system. She did not get the justice she fought for in her lifetime, but she secured a different kind of justice for the future, a future she would never see. The story of Evangeline Vandermark is more than a dark tale from a forgotten century. It is a blueprint. It is a detailed schematic of how power truly operates. It shows us that history is not a gentle, flowing river. It is a series of violent acquisitions, of truth suppressed, and of narratives controlled by a select few. The Pittsburgh Circle was not an anomaly. It was a prototype, an early model of the kind of centralized, unaccountable power that seeks to dominate every aspect of modern life. They used boiler explosions and hired guns. Today's circles use different tools. They use financial algorithms, data mining, psychological operations disseminated through social media, and legal systems so complex that only they can navigate them. The goal is the same: to eliminate rivals, to control the narrative, and to consolidate power until it is absolute. The methods have become more sophisticated, the violence more abstract, but the underlying principle is identical. They still create accidents, market crashes, that wipe out the middle class. They still orchestrate disappearances, the deplatforming and character assassination of those who speak inconvenient truths. They still build their mansions, not of stone and steel, but of data and influence. And from within those digital fortresses, they shape our reality in ways we are only beginning to understand. Evangeline's story is not history. It is a warning. It is a field manual for the war that is still being fought all around you, every single day. What, then, is the ultimate lesson? It is this: power is not an external force that is imposed upon you. It is a system that requires your participation. It thrives on your ignorance, your distraction, your belief in the official story. The greatest strength of any control system is the conviction of the controlled that the system is natural, inevitable, and for their own good. Evangeline's power came the moment she stopped participating, the moment she saw the system for what it was and began to secretly work against it. She became a sovereign individual, operating within a hostile state. She could not win with force, so she chose to win with knowledge. She understood that a perfectly documented truth is the most powerful weapon in the universe. It can be buried for a time, but it cannot be destroyed. It is a seed that will lie dormant for decades, waiting for the right conditions to crack the stone and reach for the light. This is the path to self-mastery. It is not about acquiring wealth or status within the existing system. It is about understanding the system so completely that you are no longer subject to its rules. It is about developing the perception to see the hidden machinery behind the stage, to read the coded language of power, and to recognize the patterns of control in your own life. This is the knowledge that changes a man forever. It is the transition from being a piece on the board to being a player who understands the game. The world is full of locked rooms and official stories. Your life is surrounded by them. The economic systems you are told are fair. The political choices you are told are meaningful. The historical narratives you are taught are complete. But now you have seen how a locked room can be a lie. You have seen how an official story can be a weapon. You can no longer unsee it. You now carry the burden and the power of Evangeline's discovery. You must learn to question the sealed narratives in your own world. When a story seems too perfect, too simple, too convenient for those in power, you must learn to look for the hidden chamber. You must learn to measure the dimensions of what you are being told against the reality you can observe. You must search for the evidence that has been erased, the voices that have been silenced, the truths that have been buried. This requires a new kind of discipline, a mental toughness, the will to stand outside the consensus, to trust your own perception over the manufactured reality. It is a lonely path, but it is the only path that leads to true freedom. The sovereign. Man is not the one who shouts the loudest. He is the one who sees the clearest. He is the one who understands that the walls around him are not there to protect him. They are there to contain him, and he spends his life quietly searching for the key, or if necessary, forging his own. The story of Evangeline Vandermark ends, but her war continues. It is a war for your mind, a war for your perception of reality. The forces she fought against have not vanished. They have evolved. They have become more sophisticated, more integrated into the fabric of our lives. They are the architects of the digital cages and the psychological matrices that define the 21st century. The question is no longer what happened in Pittsburgh in 1887. The question is, what is happening in your world right now? Who are the members of the modern circles? What are the accidents they are engineering? What truths are they trying to bury? Evangeline left a map. She left a blueprint. She showed you how they operate, how they think, and how they can be fought. She proved that the truth, when documented and preserved, has a power that transcends even death. Now the choice is yours. You can hear this story, feel a momentary chill, and go back to your life, back to the comforting sleep of the consensus. Or you can accept the knowledge you have been given. You can become a watcher. You can start your own quiet investigation into the nature of the world around you. You can choose to see. Evangeline Vandermark wagered her life on the belief that the truth mattered. Do you? Look around you. The game is still being played. And now you know the rules.